October being marked as Transport Month, and that's aimed at focusing on the importance of reliable transportation systems in order to drive a healthy economy. So let's unpack what this actually means, practically speaking, with a number of stakeholders. Joining us in studio is Rebecca Phala. She's with the South African Taxi Association, the national spokesperson, and via our video link is Xolani Fihla, no stranger to us on this platform, the spokesperson for the Johannesburg Metro Police. To both our guests, thanks very much indeed for making time, and welcome to the SABC. Rebecca, you're closest to me, so perhaps I can kick things off with you. Whenever we think about Transport Month, it'd be remiss of us to leave the taxi industry out. It's the biggest mode of transport used by people throughout the country, but I'm afraid always doesn't necessarily, it's not always smooth sailing or smooth riding, I should say. What are some of your focus areas as we mark this Transport Month in order to, I suppose, hone in on some of those concerns?
Thanks, Ayanda, and greetings to your viewers. Look, for us at Santaco, Transport Month is really a chance for us to report back on people like you and then greater South Africans in terms of what have we been doing for the whole year to try better the industry. You would remember that since 2020, during the Lekgotla, we sat there and made essentially a commitment that we want to formalize the taxi industry. We want to really diversify our income streams, amongst many other things. So for us, the theme this year, we're saying we're transforming transport together. Unity is another big issue. You would have seen, for instance, some of the challenges in terms of route disputes that we continue to have. They speak a lot towards the issue of unity to say, but why does it seem as though on the ground we're not working well as we should, right? So for us, Transport Month really is about that, honing in on what we do on a daily basis. What does the status quo look like, and how do we better the services for every commuter in South Africa?
It's a good place to start because you speak about unity, which immediately allows us to speak about the different stakeholders, including law enforcement. Yes. That's where Mr. Xolani Fihla comes in, joining us via our video link this morning. And Mr. Fihla, perhaps I can ask you a very similar question. We cannot speak about Transport Month without, for example, honing in on issues around safety. In places like Johannesburg, are you finding that we're moving in the right direction insofar as safety is concerned on the roads?
Thank you so much, Ayanda, for this opportunity. Let me greet my colleague from Santaco there in the studio and also the viewers. What I can say that JMPD is definitely committed to ensuring the safety of all road users, and particularly in October Transport Month, where we amplify all of the 365-day campaigns that we have regarding road safety with various stakeholders, one of them being the taxi industry, of course. But this year's campaigns on a national level, they are focused on the critical emphasis on pedestrian safety, and we are focusing on the identified areas of concern where road fatalities amongst pedestrians are at an alarming rate. And with the data that we have received in the previous years, it has indicated that pedestrians constitute to the highest number of road fatalities in our city, and this tragic reality underscores the urgent need for a collective effort to create a safer environment on our roads. So it's not only a focus on motorists, but most definitely a focus on pedestrians as well.
That's such an interesting stat, Xolani, because I don't think a lot of people know that pedestrians constitute the bulk of the fatalities on the country's roads. What are some of the causes?
Most of the causes is crossing the road unsafely. From these statistics, we have identified key hotspots areas, and within the city of Johannesburg, this is the N1 between the Grasmere Toll Plaza and the Dipcliff interchange, and we find along those route there's a lot of informal settlements, and also along the N12 between Freedom Park and Protea Glen, and this is due to these people crossing the roads unsafely. And also what also constitutes two pedestrian fatalities is unorderly behavior, like drunk, being under the influence of alcohol, and crossing roads such as the freeway. And we do know that the freeway is totally prohibited for pedestrians and also cyclists. And if one could make any slight mistake, unfortunately, you'd have serious injuries, but most likely fatal injuries in that instant.
Sure, fascinating indeed. Rebecca, let me bring the discussion closer to you. I mean, on this line of safety, I mean, you and I spoke for choice about any commuter that we could bring into the studio to speak about their experience of that one taxi they got in and they were afraid if they were ever going to make it to their destination. Speak to us about Santaco's efforts to try and ensure that, frankly, the vehicles that are being used are roadworthy and are safe.
Sure, look, one of the biggest sort of achievements that we always draw inspiration from is how we've managed to convince vehicle manufacturers to reduce the speed limit on all the minibuses. So when you purchase a minibus, it drives until 100 kilometers per hour. We found that that has contributed incredibly in terms of the statistics. Hence, if you reflect, for instance, on the last Easter statistics as well as the last 2023 festive season statistics, you'll find that the contribution of the taxi industry has been incredibly lesser when you compare to perhaps 5 years from now. But in addition to that, we've got a flagship program. It's called Tlokomela, which essentially talks to road safety as well as customer service. That's where we would often work closely with stakeholders like JMPD. So what we do is we complement what they do. When they stop vehicles, we essentially also complement that, starting at the rank, to say before a vehicle leaves, you avoid situations like what we had in Cape Town last year in August, where you were told your vehicles are operating with smooth tires. And then the question becomes, but how did the vehicle leave the facility in the first place? So those are some of the things that we've been doing. But in addition to that, there are some demerit systems that associations also have in place. And oftentimes, unfortunately, South Africans, because of this technology that we're in, they'll take a video, put it on TikTok and trends, and they don't necessarily notify the authorities in this regard, associations, so that we've got a mechanism of consequence management being put in place. So those are some of the things that we're doing, yeah.
How are your operators responding to some of these interventions, especially this cap on the speed capacity, for lack of a better term, of vehicles?
Look, I don't think we want to necessarily know how they feel about that because it's a safety measure, you understand. And remember, Ayanda, in South Africa, we want to also acknowledge, especially because it's Transport Month, that one of the reasons why our taxis also cause a lot of accidents is the conditions in which we operate. So whilst buses will drive on a trunk route, taxis are in mixed traffic. Just after you pass a traffic light, a passenger says, after robot, you have to literally stop there and there. That often causes an inconvenience to the next road user. So those are some of the other problems that we have. So these speed limitations help in that particular regard, so that even when you hit the brake, the impact is not as hectic as it would have been. But also remember, the urge to speed, which would often cause accidents in the past, was because these people are chasing, a target for a daily rate. That's a discussion to be had on a different scale altogether. The reality of the kind of conditions that we're working in, which often force for our drivers to drive as recklessly as many would often be seen to be doing, because there's a target that you're chasing, because you just don't have enough support in terms of the capital to be able to meet your monthly repayments on that vehicle and be able to fend for the family.
Yeah, context is important. Not an excuse, of course, but it helps us understand the problem a bit better. Speaking about problems, Xolani, in my kind of experience, I have learned that there are instances where the relationship between officers and, for example, the taxi industry can be a bit antagonistic at times. This cat and mouse that we see sometimes playing itself out in places like Johannesburg. How would you describe where you're at the moment, perhaps, especially around this Transport Month?
What I can say, and especially with relationships, we do have a close one with taxi associations operating within the city of Johannesburg, and they greatly help us a lot, and especially when it comes to the behavior of the motorists and the taxi operators as well. But what I can say is moving forward, and as part of our intensified enforcement efforts that starting from October and stretching throughout the festive season and beyond, is that JMPD will be working together with the various stakeholders, and this including the taxi industry, but other law enforcement agencies as well as the National Traffic Police and the Gauteng Traffic Police as well, and road safety ambassadors. And will be conducting a series of operations aimed at educating drivers and pedestrians alike about the critical importance of road safety. And officers will be stationed at critical junctions and at pedestrian crossings to ensure the compliance, but also to assist vulnerable responsible road users as well. But it's great to hear from Santaco of all of these initiatives that have been put in by the taxi industry, and that's why we also urge motorists to be mindful of pedestrians and to remain vigilant and don't drive over excessive speeds.
Yeah, are you finding that compliance is improving?
We are finding that compliance is improving, especially when there is pressure from the taxi associations regarding their drivers. So there is compliance that is happening slowly but surely, and with that close collaboration with all the stakeholders, we'll have smooth roads within the city of Johannesburg.
All right, that's good to hear. Hopefully some motorists will be able to attest to that. Let's speak about formalizing the industry, something you've already touched on. For as long as I've been doing this, there's been conversations about it. There has never been material change insofar as that is concerned. And I find it's a conversation that usually comes about whenever there's any kind of taxi-related violence over routes or any other dispute. What's kind of causing this backlog, at least from your vantage point?
Sure. Look, I think we must acknowledge that the taxi industry is very distinct, right? You've got just over 300,000 operators nationwide who have varied numbers of vehicles that they are operating as their own. So when we came out of the 2020 National Taxi Law at the time, one of the resolutions was that let's corporatize the taxi industry. So taxi associations become companies that are registered. And then from there, the operators essentially relinquish being sole proprietors into becoming founding members of a cooperative. But we found in many aspects, because we've already started practicing that obviously if you've got an association that's got over 500 members, you're going to register more than one entity there. By the time you register entity number 10, there's issues of compliance with entity number 1, because there's a challenge of skills and capabilities in that particular regard. So on the 9th of October, for instance, what we've said is, whilst this corporatization issue may need to be looked at a bit deeply, we're going to get operators to register the drivers that are working for them to get issues like your UIF, your compensation fund, because they sustain injuries in the line of work. But the reality of the matter is, you're right, it's become this big issue that gets spoken about, it's thrown forward, but you don't see what's happening really. We're drawing a lot of comfort in Minister Barbara Creecy saying the department will hold a workshop towards the end of this year to talk to experts to say, look, some associations have tried to corporatize themselves, even going as far as registering different entities, some of which will also trade in vehicle parts and others. But there's a challenge of capability and skills in that regard. So it looks like the model as you would have it in accordance with CIPC might not be able to work necessarily for the industry. So I think compared to perhaps where we were last year, we're starting to see where we've tried it, that corporatization in sort of the basic of ways is not necessarily working for the industry. But I think there is some progress in that regard.
We certainly hope so, because as we've mentioned, we've had this conversation before in many ways, but I'm told that's the time we have this morning. Thank you very much for coming in and helping us speak about some of these important issues. And dare I say, we've painted a very rosy picture of what the sector looks like. And I'm going to allow our viewers to make of that what they will as they correspond or at least correlate with their own experience on the roads. But Xolani Fihla, JMPD spokesperson, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. And Rebecca Phala, who is with us from the South African National Taxi Association. That's Santaco. She's the national spokesperson.